My parents told me when I was a toddler, I hated being buckled in a stroller. And as soon as I could walk, I never, ever sat in a stroller again. I've always craved adventure. And I think even as a child, I expressed the desire to explore the world by rejecting limits. Why limit yourself to be buckled and ferried around in a stroller when you could be free to wander the world on your own 2 feet? As a child, every new location I discovered was always fresh and exciting. A simple trip to the local aquarium or a hike up the mountain. It always felt like this great grand adventure. And then I grew up. And I began to realize that the world wasn't as wild and fantastical as I had hoped it would have been. Every exciting location I discovered as a child grew to become boring and mundane to me as an adult. And unless I had the financial abilities to buy myself a ticket to Bali every week, my days of adventure had come to an end, and I had reached the limits of exploration. But if there's one thing all of you here know about me, it's that I hate limits. And it just so happened I found the key to breaking the limits of my reality. My name is Sean, I'm a digital artist, and I would like to share with everyone a story about finding adventure in a limitless world. I take the train to work daily, and I come home very much the same way. I sit on a cold bench, and I look across at the even colder, bored faces of my fellow passengers. I place my hand on the frosty metal pole, and I look out into the darkness that is the subway tunnels. It is honestly one of the most boring experiences I have to go through every day of my life. But you know where else is cold and requires you to travel through a dark beyond? Outer space. Because going to work is boring. But when you travel from your home planet of Earth to the far-fetched colonies of the galaxy on a spaceship, now that becomes an adventure. I see the lights outside the trains, and I don't just see them as LED electronic lights. I see them as stars, asteroids, and meteorites. I see travelers in their spacesuits entering the trains, only to take off their protective gear and store them in compartments below the seats, which have now, by the way, been elongated, so that travelers may put their feet up and take a nap across the galaxy. You see, another thing is that traveling through space can take months, if not years. So I think it would be wise if we could cultivate agriculture on the train. The plants we grow below the main deck, they can provide us food and oxygen on the long journey through space. You see, with a bit of creativity, even an ordinary train ride to work can become an epic space adventure. And if you apply this simple process to your daily life, you will come to realize that you can find adventure even in the most ordinary of places. And while the locations of these ordinary places inspire me to look for adventure, I am equally affected by the amazing works that already exist out there by other artists. Some artists, they paint on canvases. Some, they sculpt on white marble. But few realize that video games are a work of art in itself. How many of us have played video games only to be mesmerized by the beautiful worlds behind our computer screens? These are worlds, locations, and experiences that cannot exist in our reality. But when various artists come together to create these video game worlds, it gives me the chance to discover, to explore and experience a whole new universe. And I am forever changed by it, inspired by these video game worlds to look at the real world around me differently. And the real world around me is a concrete metropolis. Everything here is made of glass and steel. Some people would even say that Singapore is the epitome of a modern, futuristic world. And the best example of this is Marina Bay Sands, overlooking the Central Business District. Whenever I walk past the flashy boulevards, I cannot help but reimagine myself in one of my science fiction video game worlds set in an underwater city. You see, the mall is a layer of glass that covers it as a ceiling. It's absolutely beautiful. But what if that layer of glass was built for a higher purpose? What if it was built to keep seawater out and to sustain a thriving city below the ocean? Now that's the kind of city I would love to live in. And if you apply this idea, this concept to the many other futuristic architecture in Singapore, perhaps many other locations were built for this exact same purpose. And I drew that comparison to the Orchard Gateway Tube that links two shopping malls across a busy street. Because as simple as the tube looks and functions on dry land, I think when placed in my underwater city universe, it suddenly becomes a vital transportation path, allowing travelers and citizens to traverse the city freely, without getting wet, of course. Now, I've always enjoyed playing video games. Video games gave me the freedom to discover and explore worlds and universes that could never exist in reality. But I was always told from a young age that video games were a waste of time, that I would accomplish nothing sitting in front of a computer screen. But this world and the adventure that I just brought you on, it was inspired by a video game and completed with Photoshop, both behind a computer screen. Now, many people have asked, why are most of my works based in Singapore? And the answer is simple. I look for adventure in my daily life, and my life is here in Singapore. As a born and bred Singaporean, another inspiration for my ideas come from my own upbringing here in Singapore. An example, as a child, I would visit a temple during the Chinese New Year with my family. While the grown-ups prayed in the inner sanctum, I would curiously wander the temple grounds. The temple I visited, it was old, it was dark. There were only small oil lamps giving faint flickering lights. The interiors were thick with incense smoke, and you could clearly see the various life-sized statues of the various gods and goddesses in the temple. I always felt like an explorer discovering a long-lost, forgotten temple. The atmosphere, it was so dark and mysterious and moody, but I absolutely loved it. Even though all the new temples in Singapore these days are all big, bright, modern, and filled with large, airy spaces, I have always hoped that all temples should look like the one I visited as a child. So I sought to bring that mysterious, that dark, that moody atmosphere into even the brightest temples I visit now by placing it in my underwater city universe. The temple would still be dark, but the images of the gods are brought to life with science fiction neon lights. There is a single little kitty cat acting as a guardian to this sacred shrine, and you can clearly see the cryptic neon scribbles written by devotees on the wall. Now this is the kind of temple I would love to rediscover all over again. But don't worry, not all my experiences in Singapore was dark and mysterious. Like most Singaporeans, young and old, I was told of a time before sunny Singapore was a city of skyscrapers. A long time ago, most people used to live in what you would call a kampong. A kampong was basically a local village where small shanty houses were clustered together. Many of these kampong villages were located next to waterways, where they were lifted up by wooden stilts, mere inches above the waterline. Of course, no one these days lives in a kampong village anymore, and most people, including myself, would have grown up in government-built flats known as HDBs. Many of these government-built flats are usually described as very modern, organized, and clean, in complete contrast to the small, unorganized kampong villages of the past. So I thought it would have been a fresh idea to combine the concept of the rising seawaters of climate change, the old kampong villages of the past, and the new, modern HDB flats of the present, to create an urban environment that was entirely new. When the rising seawaters finally come in and engulf our cities, many people whose homes are now submerged underwater, they may find it easier to return back to a kampong village lifestyle. Many of these kampong villages would then begin to cluster around existing buildings. Signs of commercial activity, billboards and advertisements in the local languages, they would all spring up and add to the chaotic but beautiful new urban mess we see now. And of course, the public bus service would become a public boat service, linking communities as they would have on dry land. Now, I've talked a lot about the ideas that inspire me, and you can see that they mainly come from three places. 1, the ordinary locations around me. 2, the video games that I play. And 3, my own upbringing. And what I do is to combine these three ideas together with technical programs such as Photoshop to bring my ideas to life. Now, it may sound hard to bring a made-up world from scratch into place, but I had the advantage of using what the real world could already provide, which was the actual locations of the places I wanted to recreate. Let me take you on a journey of the process I go through when creating these images. I usually start with a base image that I take with a camera. I chose this image, for example, because I felt that the gap between the two buildings, they would make for an interesting story. What if there was a waterfall going through that gap? So naturally, for that to happen, I would have to flood the streets with water. And with the power invested in me by my Lord and Savior Photoshop, I drag a waterfall into the image, and you can see that the image has been almost completely transformed. But still, this is an urban environment, and it looks devoid of life. So I go ahead to add in various signs of habitation, such as shop signs and even a bus boat. At this point, I try to bring in ideas from around the world. I'm particularly inspired by the canals of Venice and the chaotic streets of Hong Kong. So what I try to do is to merge the look and feel of these international places, but also maintain a uniquely Singaporean and Southeast Asian identity to the image. Well, with the main elements all put in place, I further dramatize the composition. I have wires that hang precariously across the buildings, birds that swoop under, and I even add rubbish into the water, because you wouldn't expect that the river passing through such an urban environment to be entirely clean. And there you have it, the complete image. Now, I'm really glad that I have the chance to explain how my works are created, because many times when I try to tell people how my works are made without the visuals, many people, they don't seem to understand how it's possible. How it's possible for a street to become a river, how it's possible for a train to be blasted off into outer space, and I don't blame them. This world we live in is limited by the walls of reality. It constrains us to think only according to the laws of physics, and society would have us believe that to think otherwise is wrong. As a child, I was always in vain pursuit of a wild, epic adventure in worlds and universes that could never exist, only to realize that the worlds, the adventures that I've always wanted to see, they were merely just an idea away. There is a saying that resonates strongly for me, and perhaps our generation. We are the middle children of history. We were born too late to explore Earth, and born too early to explore space. But for me, I'm always born just in time to explore the furthest reaches of my own imagination. Thank you.